In 1977, a specialist at the United States National Archives and Records Administration accidentally found a letter sent to the President of the United States on November 6, 1940. "My good friend Roosevelt, I don't know very English, but I know as much as I write to you." At first glance, this letter of a 12-year-old boy did not look any different from thousands of others that children sent to the President of the United States. But the specialist's attention was attracted by a sprawling signature at the end of the letter and the boy's name, Fidel Castro. "I like to hear the radio, and I'm very happy because I heard in it that you will be president for a new periodo," wrote the boy in his letter. He also asked the US president to send him a $10 bill, because he had never seen one. Just a $10 bill that may have changed the entire history of American-Cuban relations and possibly the course of the Cold War. I think it is difficult to argue that childhood events have a significant influence on one's personality development. A trace of childhood failures can be so strong that they can remain with the person for the rest of the life and sometimes even may affect one's future decisions. Fidel Castro, one of the most important figures in international politics during the Cold War, was hardly an exception. But most of his biographies only mention that Fidel was born into a family of wealthy farmer, received primary education at prestigious school, and then they switched directly to his student years. And even though it is true that Castro grew up in a wealthy family, but his childhood years can hardly be called peaceful. The future El Comandante Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz was born on August 13, 1926 in a small village of Biran in the province of Oriente. His father, Ángel Castro Argiz, was a former Spanish immigrant and by that time a fairly wealthy farmer and landowner. Fidel's mother, Lina Ruz González, was almost 30 years younger than Ángel and worked as a maid at his estate. Lina gave birth to Ángel's 5 children before their relationships became official in 1943. It means that all his childhood Fidel had to bear a stigma of an illegitimate child, or bastard if you will, that was a rather heavy burden in those times in Cuba. Fidel's mother insisted that her sons receive a good education, and this is most likely the reason for some uncertainty regarding Fidel's date of birth, since his record of baptism indicates his year of birth as 1927. It is believed that parents added him 1 year so that Fidel could go to school earlier. But even though his parents sent their children to a good school, it was soon that Fidel and his brothers got expelled for bullying. Young Fidel, who considered his expulsion as a huge injustice, told his parents that he would burn the house if they didn't bring him back to school. It is worth mentioning that Fidel's stubborn nature did not make any exceptions for anyone, even for his parents. When he was 13, Fidel started a workers' strike on his father's plantation, demanding to improve their working conditions. But despite all this, Ángel, using his connections, managed to send young Fidel and his brothers, Raúl and Ramón, to one of the best schools in Cuba, Colegio Dolores. It was an elite school for children of high-ranking Cuban politicians and business people. But even at new school, Fidel's explosive temper did not leave anyone at peace. Due to their low social status, the Castro brothers were social outcasts among higher society children. This led to constant conflicts between Fidel and other students that often ended not in his favor. Despite Fidel's phenomenal memory, he has never been an excellent student at school. So in an attempt to earn his place in a small school community, he devoted most of his energy to sports. Fidel's favorite sports were basketball and baseball, and it was actually a sport that caused an event that had a huge impact on the future El Comandante's personality. One day, Castro struck out when playing a baseball with a makeshift ball made of taped-together bottle caps. The crowd of students jeered at him and broke into laughter. Humiliated, Castro threw the bat at his mockers, striking a classmate and dislocating his shoulder. José Antonio Cubeñas, Fidel's one of the most uncompromising school rivals, called him an animal, beast, tackled the young Castro, and, cheered by the audience, knocked him to the ground. According to Fidel's classmates, public humiliation in front of the entire school had a huge effect on Fidel. The crowd saw him defeated. Castro promised to his friends that he would never allow such humiliation again. In 1898, during the war with Spain, the United States helped Cuba gain formal independence, and although Cuba did not become an American colony, the country was still under the US protectorate. Despite this fact, young Fidel did not seem to feel any particular hatred towards the big northern neighbor. Having witnessed a terrible social inequality in his country, Fidel probably even had some sympathy for the US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who managed to lead his country out of severe economic crisis by launching social programs aimed to help poorest parts of the American population. And perhaps it was these sympathies, coupled with the naive childhood dreams about social justice, that prompted him to write a letter to the President Franklin Roosevelt. The letter from a young and unknown Cuban boy to one of the most powerful men in the world strikes with its straightforwardness and even familiar tone. Fidel writes with respect, yet without any unnecessary compliments and flattery. "My good friend Roosevelt," that is how Fidel addressed the leader of the most powerful country in the world. "I am 12 years old, I am a boy, but I think very much. If you like, give me a $10 bill green American in the letter. Because never I have not seen a $10 bill green American, and I would like to have one of them." But apparently thinking that he also had to offer something in return, Fidel added, "If you want iron to make your ships, I will show you the biggest minas of iron of the land, they are in Mayaria Riente, Cuba. Thank you very much, goodbye, your friend Fidel Castro." To Fidel's big surprise, he soon received a response from the US President's office that thanked the young Cuban boy for his letter. However, to Fidel's great disappointment, there was no money in the envelope. Nevertheless, the letter was posted on a school bulletin board, which made Fidel a big school celebrity. Of course, the US President himself replied to his letter, but Castro did not share the overall joy and told his friends that all Americans are assholes.
From his stronghold in the wild Sierra Maestre Mountains, Cuba's Fidel Castro emerged triumphant after 2 years of guerrilla warfare against the Batista regime.
On January 1, 1959, Fidel Castro's rebel army entered the Cuban capital, Havana. That was the beginning of a new and quite controversial page in the history of Cuba. It was pretty much right away that the new government faced a long list of tasks, in particular, building diplomatic relations with its neighbors. As a Cuban prime minister, Fidel Castro made his first international visit to the United States. At that time, it was a common practice for all leaders of small Latin American countries. But there was something different about this visit. His delegation's main objective was to secure financial support from the US government, but strangely, Castro forbade his delegation members to discuss it with Americans. At the press conference upon his arrival to the United States on April 15, 1959, Fidel Castro told reporters that he wasn't just another Latin American beggar and he would not humiliate himself and ask Americans for money. Cuban Minister of Finance Rufo Lopez Frisque, who was a member of Castro's delegation, once recalled, "I suggested an idea of a financial loan, but Dr. Castro made it clear that he does not allow any discussion on this matter with Americans. It was very important for Fidel." Rufo also said that one day at a banquet, Fidel noticed me get up from the table during his furious speech. He knew that I had a scheduled meeting with Robert Anderson, the US Treasury Secretary. Fidel immediately interrupted his speech, approached me and said, "Remember, Rufo, I don't want you to discuss money." Of course, it would be wrong to assume that the only reason for Castro's decision was the $10 bill that he had not received as a child. Yet by looking at his actions and decisions, one could say that childhood insults coupled with his unwillingness to be humiliated by those in power probably had some influence on El Comandante's personality. Fidel was very dissatisfied with his visit to the United States. The US President Dwight Eisenhower had no intention to meet with Castro and went to the Gulf course instead. Eisenhower sent his Vice President, Richard Nixon, to meet with the Cuban leader. The meeting was a complete disaster. Fidel Castro did not ask for support, and Richard Nixon did not offer it. An opportunity to build good relations between the two neighbors was irrevocably lost. Almost immediately upon his return, Fidel Castro signed the first agrarian reform that prohibited foreigners to own land in Cuba. And later in the summer, the government began the confiscation of lands owned by American investors. The reluctance of the United States to provide Cuba with small financial assistance sparked a chain of events that eventually cost the American budget billions of dollars spent on the fight against Fidel Castro's regime. But funny thing, Castro caused financial losses not only for the US budget.
There is not communism or Marxism in our ideas.
Having not found support in the United States, Fidel Castro started to look for it elsewhere, and of course he succeeded soon.
Por encima de todo, somos marxistas leninistas.
The USSR decided to take advantage of the situation and began to provide Cuba with all kinds of assistance. But being blinded with their political goals, the Soviets had sacrificed the economic sense. The Soviet Union's total cost to support the island of freedom is estimated at more than $35 billion, and most of the debt was eventually written off in 2014.
Большое спасибо, советские братья!
Presidents of the United States continue to receive thousands of letters with various requests that most often are impossible to satisfy, or there is even no sense in doing it. President Eisenhower was asked not to send Elvis Presley to the army, or at least to save his sideburns, as they were a national treasure. A schoolboy asked President Reagan to have his room declared a federal disaster area and clean his room with the government funds. Of course, it is naive to believe that there was even a slight possibility for President Roosevelt to reply to the young Fidel Castro's letter. And yet, sometimes you cannot help thinking what the history of the 20th century could have looked like. Would there be the Cuban Missile Crisis and the threat of a global nuclear war if 80 years ago a little childhood dream of a Cuban boy to receive a $10 bill from the President of the United States came true?
Viva Cuba libre! Libertad o muerte!
And that's the story. If you like stories like this, watch my video about the launch of a scientific rocket from Norway that almost started a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. On that day, only one push of a button held the world from an outbreak of a nuclear war. That's all for now. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Goodbye. And guess my accent if you can.